Welcome to Mastermind Conversations, a Pro Insights podcast, powered by Geek in New York, where we don't just talk, we geek it. We break down complex topics, research from trusted sources, and bring your expert insights, real-life stories, and actionable tips, all in a clear and engaging way. So get ready, it's time to geek it with Mastermind Conversations.
All right, so you know how it is sometimes you're looking at a piece of jewelry. Maybe it's something that's been in the family for a while, or maybe you just need some cash and you're thinking, maybe I should sell this, or maybe I should go to a pawn shop, especially if it's gold or has precious stones.
Right, yeah. And if you're in Queens, it's like, where do you even start?
Exactly. And that's what we're diving into today, specifically for you listening out there in Queens. Should you pawn or sell your golden gems? How can you make sure you're getting the most for them?
Yeah. And it can be a bit overwhelming. You know, there's a lot to consider.
Absolutely. So for this deep dive, we've gone deep. We've looked at gold's history as money, how to actually figure out what your golden gems are worth, and even how pawn shops think and operate.
We've pulled from all sorts of sources, investment reports, practical guides on selling jewelry, even some of those pawn shop reality shows to get a really full picture.
It's all about giving you the knowledge so you can walk in confident and get the best possible outcome, whether you decide to pawn or sell, and especially knowing how to find a trustworthy place in Queens.
Exactly. By the end of this, you'll know the difference between pawning and selling, how to get the most value for your pieces, and maybe most importantly, how to choose the right place to do business right here in Queens.
Speaking of trusted local options, we want to mention Jamaica Pawn Inc. right off the bat. They're right here in Queens, and they offer free estimates, so you can call them at 718-739-6060 or go to their store at 14516 Jamaica Ave, Jamaica, New York, 11435.
Great place to start. And as we go through all this, keep them in mind.
So let's start with the basics. What makes gold and gems valuable in the first place? Why are these things worth anything?
Right. Well, let's start with gold. It's pretty fascinating how gold has always been seen as a store of wealth throughout history.
It's true. We were reading that even when people used other things as currency, like we've heard of cigarettes in prisons or even seashells in some cultures, whenever there's a real crisis, like a war or an economic collapse, people turn back to gold.
It's like that underlying sense of real money, something that holds its value.
And our research shows that even governments have recognized this, like back in 1751 in England. They made a law that any paper money had to be backed by gold or silver.
Wow, so that shows you how deeply ingrained this idea is.
Exactly, and it's relevant today. Think about the US dollar. Our sources say that it actually lost a lot of its purchasing power between 2000 and 2012, partly because of worries about the amount of debt the US has.
And what's interesting is that during that same period, the price of gold went way up. It's often seen as a safeguard, a way to protect yourself against those swings in traditional currencies.
Exactly. People call it crisis insurance. But it's important to remember the price of gold can rise for different reasons. Sometimes it's fear and uncertainty in the markets, a short-term thing.
But other times it's driven by more fundamental long-term changes, like currency devaluation, that can lead to a sustained increase in gold's value.
And our sources even give some cool examples, like in the 1970s when you actually lost money holding cash after accounting for inflation, investors moved their money out of cash and into things like gold, pushing the price up.
But then, in the early 80s, interest rates went way up, making cash more appealing, and the price of gold went down. It's that constant push and pull.
Right. So now, if you're thinking about owning gold, there are a few ways to do it. You've got physical bullion, like American Gold Eagle coins. Those are pretty popular.
Yeah, and they're easy to buy and sell because they're recognized everywhere. Then there are rare coins like the $20 St. Gaudens.
I was reading about that one. It was a big deal in the early 1900s, like the $100 bill of its day.
And there are still a lot of them out there, which is interesting because some experts think that actually makes them more liquid than regular bullion because they're so widely held and there's this collector market for them.
So they're valuable for more than just the gold they contain.
Exactly. Then you have gold ETFs, which are basically like stocks that track the price of gold. But one thing to note is the IRS sees those as collectibles in an IRA, and that can affect how they're taxed. So something to keep in mind.
And for those who are okay with more risk, there are junior mining stocks. They can offer higher returns, but there's a lot more uncertainty.
Yeah, those are definitely for the more adventurous investor. And another practical thing to think about is storage. Where do you keep physical gold if you own it?
Our sources really emphasize having some gold readily accessible just in case of emergencies, so maybe don't keep it all overseas where it might be hard to get to.
And when we talk about physical gold, especially like large bars or unusual coins, it's important to remember the risk of counterfeits.
Yeah.
Fake gold.
But those widely traded coins like the American Gold Eagles are pretty safe, right?
Yeah, because they're so standardized, it's harder to fake them successfully.
One last thing on gold that we found interesting was China's role in the market. Apparently, their government has been steadily buying up gold, and any gold mined in China stays in the country, going straight to the government.
Wow, that's significant. Some analysts think it's a way for them to gain more influence in the global financial system.
So it's definitely something to watch. All right, let's move on to gems and jewelry. And diamonds are still hugely popular as symbols of love, and their hardness makes them really durable.
But how can you tell if a diamond is real? There are a lot of imitations out there.
Right. Well, our sources talk about a few things you can do, like the fog test, where you breathe on the stone to see how quickly the condensation disappears.
So a real diamond will clear up fast because it disperses heat so well, while things like cubic zirconia or moissanite will stay foggy longer.
You can also check the weight to diameter ratio. A genuine diamond of a certain size should weigh a certain amount.
And it's always good to look for inscriptions and lab reports, especially from a reputable lab like GIA. Those reports give you all the details about the diamond's quality, like the 4Cs, karat cut, color, and clarity.
You can also look at the diamond's fluorescence, how it reacts to UV light, and even get professional testing done to be absolutely sure if it's natural or lab created.
And speaking of testing, don't forget about the gold itself. It's not always solid gold, right?
You're right. Sometimes it's just gold-plated, meaning there's a thin layer of gold over a cheaper metal, and that can wear off over time.
Exactly. So look for markings like GP, GF, or GEP. Those usually mean it's gold-plated.
But for solid gold, look for hallmarks. Those are little stamps, usually inside rings or near the clasps, that tell you the purity of the gold, like 10K, 14K, 18K, or 24K.
And one thing to watch out for is markings like 800, 925, or 958 in an oval shape. That actually means it's silver, not white gold, so don't get tricked.
Oh, that's good to know. And, our sources even suggest getting a small jewelry scale so you can weigh your gold before you even go anywhere.
That's a great idea, because then you know exactly how much gold you have in grams or pennyweights, and you can check the current spot price of gold, which is basically what raw gold is trading for right now.
So you can calculate the actual value of the gold in your piece based on the weight and the carat.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so now that we know a bit more about the value of these things, let's talk about the big question, pawning versus selling. What's the difference?
So pawning is basically getting a loan using your gold or jewelry as collateral. You take it to a pawn shop, they give you money, and they hold on to your stuff.
Right, and you pay interest on that loan. And the key thing for the pawn shop is whether they think you'll come back to repay the loan and get your stuff back.
So how do they decide how much to lend you in the first place?
Well, they look at the condition of the item, any damage, and how easy they think it'll be to sell if they have to. They also factor in the likelihood of you repaying the loan based on your history and things like that.
They're taking a risk, right?
Yeah, and they also look at their current inventory. If they already have a lot of similar items, they might offer you less.
And what about selling outright?
Selling means you're giving up ownership of the item in exchange for cash right then and there, so it's quicker, but you can't get it back later.
So if you're listening out there in Queens and you're thinking about selling or pawning your gold and gems, how can you make sure you're getting the most money?
Well, first things first, do your research. Check the current gold prices so you know what to expect. Know the carat and weight of your gold. And if you have diamonds, get any grading reports you have ready.
So preparation is key.
Absolutely. And this might sound silly, but clean your jewelry. It makes a big difference. And here's a big one. Get estimates from multiple places. Don't just go to one shop.
That's why we mentioned Jamaica Pawn Inc. earlier. They offer free estimates so you can compare.
Exactly. Shop around and don't be afraid to negotiate. Pawn shops need to make a profit, so there's always some wiggle room.
And when it comes to gems, especially colored gemstones, think about rarity versus beauty. A super rare gem might be worth a lot to collectors, but a beautiful but more common stone might be easier to sell to regular people.
And don't forget the design and setting of the jewelry, especially if it's a well-known designer or has a unique style that can add a lot of value.
So how do you choose a trustworthy shop? There are a lot of places out there.
Look for licenses and accreditations.
Right.
Ask them about their appraisal process, how do they come up with the value, and be wary of offers that are just one lump sum without a breakdown of how they got there.
We were reading that some undercover investigations have shown that this lack of transparency can sometimes lead to people being cheated.
Yeah, and look for experienced employees who seem knowledgeable and honest. And again, we recommend checking out Jamaica Pawn Inc. They're local and have a good reputation.
Okay, so what are some red flags or mistakes to avoid?
Be careful of offers that are way too low. That could mean they think it's stolen or fake.
Yeah.
And watch out for those traveling gold buyers. They often offer prices that are much lower than the market.
And it's good to know that pawn shops usually have to verify ownership and report things to the police if they think something's shady.
Right. They have certain legal obligations to avoid dealing with stolen goods, and they need the right licenses to operate.
So just to wrap things up for our listeners in Queens, any final tips?
Take your time. Don't feel pressured. Ask questions. Trust your gut feeling. And if you have time, look into other selling options besides pawn shops like online marketplaces or specialized buyers. But research the fees and risks involved.
That's great advice. And again, if you're in Queens, check out Jamaica Pawn Inc. They're at 145 16 Jamaica, Ivy, Jamaica, New York, 11435, or you can call them at 718-739-6060.
So just to sum up the key takeaways, know the value of your items, understand the difference between pawning and selling, get multiple estimates, choose a trusted shop like Jamaica Pawn Inc., and watch out for those common pitfalls and scams.
And to leave you with something to think about now that you know a bit more about this, take a look around your house. Is there a piece of jewelry maybe tucked away in a drawer that might be worth more than you realize?
Maybe that old brooch or that gold chain has a story and a value just waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
That's a wrap for this episode of Mastermind Conversations, a Pro Insights podcast powered by Geek in New York, where we don't just talk, we geek it. We hope you gain valuable insights, learn something new, and are ready to apply it in business and life. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us bring you even more great content. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and always geek it.